Greetings, Bermuda. My name is Aaron Hill. I'm joined by my brother and good friend, Mr. Ryan Robinson, Perinchief. We are the COVID-19 special series from Bird News. Ryan, how are you?
I won't lie, Aaron. I'm a little bit tired today, and I missed my barber. I tried to shave right before this show, and I took the barber's blade and I cut myself in my finger. So I'm a
Oh,
little
no.
tired, and I missed my barber, but everything's all right. I can't complain other than that. What about you?
Well, well, the good news is that phase two looks like it's going to happen on Thursday. But before we get into that brief discussion, let's protocol as we extend our condolences to the 9 families of those who have lost loved ones to this coronavirus. We'd like to extend our sincere well wishes to all those who are currently still fighting this virus. And again, extend our deepest gratitude to our essential workers who remain on the front lines. Having said that, Ryan, I think that we've been in this pandemic for about 2 to 3 months now. And we managed to, keep it to a capacity of 9 deaths, notwithstanding that we had models and the like. And I think that we've done a fairly good job, all in all, of managing and containing this virus so far. What do you think?
No, I would agree with that, Aaron. From a health and a security standpoint, I think not only has the government responded quite well, we're starting to see that this situation looks like it's a bit under control at the moment. We hope that we've gone through the worst of it. According to the models, we haven't. But based off of how well we've adapted and adjusted, I think it's definitely something to be proud of. Another thing to consider is, of course, there's 2 elements to this response. The first is the immediate life and security and health. And the second is, of course, the recovery. So far, so good, I think. And we're also grateful to Burn News for allowing us this platform, because that second element, the recovery element, is what we are mostly talking about today and moving forward.
Yeah, no, exactly. But speaking on your haircut matter and that mishap that you had, the phase 2 takes place or begins on Thursday this week, and I think barbers are permitted, so don't try to cut your hair anymore.
No. I'm gonna try and be patient. I'm gonna be patient. I can hold out another 2 days. It's not looking too bad, I don't think.
So I know we've got a rapid shot of guests today, 6 total guests. That's a maximum capacity we've had so far during the show.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're excited. Our guests are excited. But before we get into introducing our first 2 guests, just a bit of a wrap up since our last series, our last episode. What has happened? What have you thought?
Yeah.
I mean, the announcement about phase 2 happening on Thursday, an announcement, we talked about it on this show first with respect to pay cut for MPs. We see that that's forthcoming this Friday.
Yeah, a lot has happened.
So what do you think about?
Yeah, but before we do that, Aaron, I think we should also recognize and do a quick recap of our last series. And that was the Honorable Curtis Dickinson, the Minister of Finance, right? And Ms. Erica Smith of the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation. And that was one of our best series yet. We talked a lot about sort of the economic perspectives and standpoint as it comes to responding to this crisis. And that was a good show. And I'm hoping that we can continue on that trend with our guests today and our discussions moving forward. It was very productive, and we quite enjoyed all of the feedback from the viewers. Now, as for your actual question, yeah, a lot has happened, Aaron. We talked, and there was a lot of criticism. We've had some shows where we've encouraged and given shout outs to people, and we've had some where we've been quite critical. And I know that perhaps 2 or 3 shows ago, we talked about this pay cut scenario. In fact, it was mentioned at our very first show by Ciara Burrows, who was one of our very first guests, who said that she hinted at it when she said government should lead by example. So I think a lot of people still have a lot of questions about our economic recovery plan. But I would say it was encouraging for the Premier to reveal last night that they do intend to take a pay cut of approximately, I think, 12.5%. It also, I mean, it's encouraging that they're leading by example in that regard, but it's also a bit solemn in the sense that it shows just how serious this situation is when your government itself have now committed to taking a pay cut of over 12%. What do you think?
No, I agree. I think that I commend the government for the fact that they've led by example. Many may say that it's been too long and this should have been on the table, but I mean, they've taken the step. Many will question whether it's enough, because when you look at 12.5% to a minister, for example, who was making $156,000, that's a $19,000 decrease. So you're still making $130-something thousand for a minister who's not or an MP rather, who's not a minister, that's a pay cut of around $7,000. So you're still taking home, in addition to your day job, $50,000 from the public purse. So there will be arguments, and I mean, we can discuss that at a later stage. We can discuss that with the premier. And I want to just put that plug in there. Whilst we have an excellent panel and a deep panel today of 6 guests, that is also going to be followed up on Thursday with the Honorable Premier being a guest. So, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time doing the recap here today because I know that we've got a lot of guests who want to come on and speak.
And very special guests at that. So we'll expect a lot of feedback from the general public on that too.
Absolutely. And I think that our guests, before we go in to introduce them and allow them to introduce themselves and what their organizations represent, I think that it's important to note that this series is, we intend to consider a holistic approach, a holistic view of our community and the impact that COVID-19 has had. And today we're going to see some of how the community organizations have responded and how they've been impacted. And I guess without further ado, I'll leave it to you to introduce or bring on our guest.
Sure. I mean, so Aaron, we talked a little bit about the whole point of this series, like you said, to focus not on just the immediate response, but also the recovery. And so I think that the third sector plays a fundamental role in this, right? Because not only do they have to exist at a current time like this where they're responding to immediate and urgent needs, but they also will play a crucial role in the development of this situation and the recovery from that particular standpoint. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome our first 2 guests in this very first segment of the show today, which would be Dr. Myra Virgil, who is the Managing Director of the Bermuda Community Foundation, and Ms. Allison Towlson, who's the Managing Director of the Bank of Bermuda Foundation. Welcome to the 2 of you. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Hello. Well, thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you. So just to start off, we'd like to give you the opportunity, because I know we had some discussion prior to the show about what your respective organizations do, and it seems like you both do a lot. So I think it's best if we leave it to you to explain in your own words, what do your respective foundations do, and what type of work do you engage in, even before this pandemic? I think, Dr. Myra Virgil, let's start with you.
Okay. So the Bermuda Community Foundation is a grant-making organization, and what we do is we manage charitable funds for a variety of unrelated donors. That's what we do in our ordinary business, and we make grants annually from our own funding, but also from those donors. We manage their giving. We also produce something called the Vital Signs Report, which is about quality of life in Bermuda and what priorities we have to focus our collective energies on improving. So that's what we do in normal days, and we can talk about what the emergency pieces look like after Allison gets a chance.
Sure. I like that vital signs plug that you put in there, and remind me if I forget, remind me to ask you a bit more about that. Thank you for that. Ms. Allison Towlson, how about you?
Thanks, Ryan. So from our perspective, we're a private independent foundation, and at the core of what we do, we place a high priority on equity and investing in programs and services in the community that make sure that it's available to all in the community. And that's very important for us as a foundation. In terms of, a play on what Myra does, we're one of the donors in the community. And what we fund on an average year is about $3 million in support of nonprofit work, services, and programs. In addition, as you two both know, we fund scholarships. And so I want to do a little shameless plug and thank you. I'm really pleased to see our investment of our scholarship alumni working so really well. So we support about $800,000 a year in scholarships for students. This year, we've just closed our scholarship application process. Those scholarships are all financial needs based. So again, keeping equity at the core of what we do. We are a very small team. It's myself as a managing director and Vivian Carter, who's our director of programs. Vivian Carter has, years of extensive work in this area in philanthropic space, and she's been critical to the work of the CCRE, which we're going to talk about today.
So beginning with you, Ms. Towlson, and then we'll ask you, Dr. Virgil, how has COVID-19 affected your organization's ability, for example, to give scholarships? And for you, Dr. Virgil, how has it affected your organization's ability to operate in general? And how do you see post-COVID-19? You mentioned that you've given $800,000 per year in scholarships, right? Are we going to be able to continue to do that?
Yes, is the answer. So, it's been challenging from the standpoint, as it has been for most businesses and nonprofits, to shift to a virtual world, right? We operated in a space where we shared office space. So we had work where we could, collaborate a lot more easily than just having to get on, Zoom or other platforms. I will say one of the things that had happened very quickly for the foundation is our first grant cycle that we do. We closed that on March 19th, and we actually did an entire board meeting virtually. It was the first time we've ever done that. I'm pleased to say it went successfully. But at that first grant cycle, we were able to still make important decisions to support the nonprofit community. That grant cycle was about $1 million that we supported the nonprofit community. To your point to the question on scholarships, we have an investment fund, and our investment strategy is such that it is for the long term. And so the desire is that we weather the storms that come from the economic crisis so that we can still contribute to the community with funding and with scholarships. So yes, we intend to still provide important and meaningful scholarships. How things have changed is very much that scholarship process is now, we're talking about this just yesterday, moving virtually. The two of you went through that process and had face-to-face interviews. We're going to now be doing that on Zoom. So we're transitioning all of our work as most organizations have been doing.
Well, I know that's
go ahead, Eron. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I know that's going to be a relief to the many students who are tuned in, because Brian and I personally have been, in touch with young Bermudians who said, well, one, individuals who have graduated and they're looking for jobs. And then you got other Bermudians who will look for summer jobs to fund their studies. And they're saying, well, I don't think that scholarships are going to be as readily available and accessible as they were pre-COVID-19. But I guess it's a great relief to hear from your organization that they will still be available.
Yes, very much so.
And I was going to say the same thing. But Allison, you mentioned scholarships specifically, but I'm wondering, the Bank of Bermuda Foundation also does other programs and does work throughout the year, correct? So how has that been impacted?
So from that perspective, that funding has not changed. So what we do is we have a strategic board meeting at the end of last year to talk about how we want to budget for this coming year. And what has happened in the pandemic, and we will be having a strategic meeting actually coming Thursday. At a time of pandemic, we need to go back and look at our budget. We need to look at it and say, is it adequate? Can we still contribute? And what does the need look like? So for a foundation, we focus very much on the need and wanting to meet those needs as best as possible. So we definitely will be looking at innovative ways to look at funding, how we give, what types of grants we give. And so that's work that we're all convening with our board on Thursday.
Perhaps before we go to you, Dr. Virgil, I thought that it would be interesting, right, to think that maybe there'd be more of a capacity if, for example, universities are shifting to online learning post-COVID-19 and you're not having the face-to-face interaction, so you don't have the room and board fees as you would ordinarily. So that'll be something interesting to see as we move forward.
Absolutely. And we're asking all of our scholarship applicants as we go through this process, what is your school doing? How is it transitioning? Will it be virtual? Will you need that funding now? Because we may be able to support more, as you say, through this virtual world.
Exactly. Dr. Virgil?
Yeah. So the Community Foundation has always had a really small staff because our fundamental belief is keep overheads low. It's myself, Michelle Grant, we have a part-time accountant, and we have a really amazing volunteer board. So what has changed for us, though, is that we've been managing anywhere from 40 to 50 donations from unrelated donors' funds, and we would do that sort of on a monthly basis. We, just in the month of April, going from something like 50 transactions a month to managing the emergency fund, which was about 350 transactions in the same period, has been the lift that we've had to make. But we've always been sort of, we can remotely access all of our technology is geared towards this type of work. So it was really just at the point when this hit, it was ramping up into emergency and a crisis response. And guys, I noticed that you asked about like types of donors, and I just wanted to kind of point out that in terms of that, this community lift, and then what is this third sector? The third sector is not just nonprofits, and nonprofits are doing what we call that they're on the front lines. They're delivering programs and services both as essential kind of emergency response, but also the day-to-day enrichment of our lives. So you get groups that are doing STEM, art, history, all these other programs that they're delivering to students in school, out of school, and often at no cost to the institution, right? So there's this whole network of the third sector that is donors, it's nonprofits, right? It's the public, and in fact, the government is a donor too. So it's actually bigger and encompasses all of us. And just in this experience with managing this rapid fire emergency fund and getting funds deployed to community groups, to people who've been doing some of this work, it tells us Bermuda is resilient. We care about the community. We're strong. We contribute. We got grants, guys, from $25 all the way up to $150,000. So everybody put what they could into that fund, and that's not even including what international businesses and companies and other groups did privately, both cash, getting supplies, as well as volunteering and all that sort of work. So this is teaching us a lot of things, which we already knew, but it's just kind of confirming how much of a caring community and a resilient community we are and we can be. And we're going to have to draw on that going forward.
Mm-hmm. That's refreshing to hear, Dr. Virgil. You mentioned a little bit about other types of charities and organizations, be that arts and history. What types of organizations do you support? I mean, we know that, for example, in response to this immediate crisis, you've probably had to shift, for example, and provide more immediate relief to people handing out food or mental health or substance abuse and homelessness. What types of organizations do both of your foundations support in general? And how has that been impacted by this current crisis?
So, do you want to go ahead?
I'll start, because then you can lead into the CCRE work more broadly, and I think that takes us, to sort of the next level of the conversation. So, from Bank of Bermuda's Foundation, we have 4 core areas. We support education, and all of that is around public education. We have a sector that we support the healthy family, so we support the community for programs that are serving for, whether it's medicines and service of delivery for people that need that from a critical chronic care disease perspective. We also have an area called Connected Communities, and that really is bringing together programs that support the whole community, whether it's youth, sport, recreation, arts and culture and history. And then last but certainly not least is our economic participation segment. So we support programs that are looking to reskill, tool, provide support for the community to be able to be employed and independent and economically sustain themselves. And so those are the 4 core areas for us. And so when we look at the shift to what's happened with the pandemic, we were already supporting some of those organizations that sit in that essential services sort of crisis type space. Many of those, and some of those had come through with the first grant cycle we do 3 a year, so some of those have already received funds. But leaning into Myra's work and the work through the Bermuda Community Foundation, we saw a need to support that work as well as an organized group. And I'll hand this over to Myra now to talk a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so you guys, when most funders of all types, corporate, all these types, will have sort of the areas that their employees or that their companies care about supporting. And to a degree, because in part that's about doing good, you don't want to influence that unduly, because when you look at it and when you step back and kind of take an aerial view of giving, as a community foundation, we say that between people's interests and then plugging in where there are some needs, you can cover, we call it A to Z grant, from animals to zoos, right? So you can get the whole gamut of community work covered between people's interests and then plugging some gaps in. What the crisis did for us is it really caused us to start to think about how we have to coordinate both those dollars and that work. And because if you can imagine, everybody has ideas about what's important, and everybody had ideas about what needs are. But at the end of the day, if you look locally, you look overseas, there are some core essential services. People need to eat, and people need shelter, and people need to be able to live, to manage their daily expenses. Food, in particular, is a thing that everybody needs access to here, everywhere, and that needed to be really quickly. We've also seen the other needs consistent with their jurisdictions, access to medication, protection from domestic violence, getting women and children who are fleeing situations a place to be safe. We saw people and have seen a lot of numbers into the emotional well-being hotline, 5431111, managed by the Bermuda Psychology Association of Volunteers. I saw a lot of hits because people are anxious, people are lonely, they are concerned, and so we saw those calls. So if you look at sort of, and they're all on our website, I'm not going to kind of lay this all up, but if you can see that Bermuda actually fell in line with, and working with the Emergency Measures Organization, we fell in line with those basic needs that when you're hungry, when you don't have money, and as it gets increasingly worse, this is where people go. They tend to fall on all of these extra services in addition to the public services. But you need, as a country, to have those people in place, those organizations in place. I say all that, but also to say that in our regular grant making, we look at what are you trying to achieve, and then again, those priorities for the community. How can we meet those priorities, those needs that the community has said are important, but based on a framework of good, solid program, evidence-based programming.
Excellent. I mean, it definitely seems as though the third sector has stepped right up, especially with your foundations in the midst of this crisis. We saw sort of a quick adaptation, a quick response as soon as the lockdown was in place, and as soon as people became unemployed, we saw a lot of charities step right in, grant making, making donations, coordinating different food packages, and all the rest. My question to you, and I guess we can start with you, Dr. Virgil. How long can you keep this up? I mean, I'm sure that you've seen an influx in funding and donations. Obviously, in a time of crisis, everybody sort of pools together, and there's an influx in resources and donations. And a lot of those are probably one-time donations where a company, for example, says, well, here's what we're going to contribute. Here's $100,000. How long, if this continues, how long do you think this will last? You know, are charities coping right now? Are some at risk of falling through? Is this work that you think you'll be able to sustain?
So that's such a big and good question, right? I'll take it. Let me take a stab. So when we all started to experience this COVID-19 pandemic, that was about March 15th, March 11th to March 15th in Bermuda, and we started to take action, shelter in place, all that sort of stuff. So that's about 8 to 9. And as I said, as a country, we responded, crisis response, emergency response, everybody's giving. And also at that point, we were coordinating with our group, the coordinated crisis response team, third sector, and getting that money and those resources in the places where they needed to be. Quick, rapid response. And to your point, you can't stay in that crisis mode. But what we have seen and what we learned, and now what we know, applying what we know in our experience, is that yes, we had some one-off emergency grants that had to be made to help some groups kind of continue to serve the populations that they were serving. But then we had this core set of essential service providers, like the food, of medicine, the mental health, all that sort of stuff, where we can actually see week on week, they report in, their numbers are rising. More people at the food bank, more people needing meals, more people, can you help out with this hardship or that hardship? Those are what we call core essential service providers, and clearly they have to be sustained. But it's no longer at this point where we should be in an emergency crisis response. As a community now, we know how to do this. We got to think about staying afloat, and I don't have a perfect word yet, but sort of restoring, reconstructing what works, and maintaining those core services. But now that we're out of that sort of crisis response, we also have to be thinking, how do we ensure that those vital programs, the ones that are having impacts that impact our kids who, once they start going back to school, but also need help, how do we ensure that proportion of nonprofit, important, vital services are sustained? Because remember, they're taking a hit as well as sort of small businesses that don't make a lot of money and then don't have a profit. They'll see unemployment. They'll see all of the events and the campaigns and things that they normally use to raise money to deliver services for this community as a national service. They're going to see that hit. So there's really two streams of work that we now know we have to sustain as a community. There's that essential piece, which, as we all know, with unemployment and all that sort of stuff, we need to have a plan, and that's probably 3 months, 6 months. And then there's the other piece of let's not let our most important vital services fall apart when, as we start to go into phase 2 and 3, this is exactly what we need, right? So you're quite right. We're not going to stay in emergency. We have to be thinking restore, reconstruct, stay afloat. For some people, it's stay afloat because they're still unemployed, they're still hungry, and they're still poor. How do we stay afloat?
Are you worried?
I think we all have to have a degree of healthy worry, and we all have to have a degree of how we're going to solve this, how we all going to share it. Because I was listening, somebody sent me a very cool podcast kind of lecture piece, and I don't want to misquote, but I thought it was so powerful I had to replay about 5 times. And in it, it said, the professor who was talking said, poor people and people who are hungry are less likely to have a moral test. They're going to do whatever they can because they're hungry and they're going to try to feed their kids. And so we have to make sure that we take care of people and to the best that we can as a community, because that's our responsibility as good community members. And I'm not saying that people haven't been very generous and very helpful and very giving, but we have to continue to work together and be hopeful and thoughtful and caring and generous as we sustain through this next period of time. So I have healthy worry, but I also see that I'm not alone. We're all in this together. We have to keep together. We got great minds. And so, yes, but yes,
Yes.
And I don't even have a word for what it looks like, but part of it is about staying afloat, and part of it is about ensuring and keeping the good that we have always had.
And I think if I can just touch on that as well, one of the things Myra said is it's not going to happen with just our 2 foundations, right? It is going to be a collaborative and collective work that needs to happen across the third sector, but also with all donors. And we know the donors have been extremely generous. And so we need to find ways as donors to be innovative, to find funding in creative ways, to really look at how we're giving, and is that giving making a capacity change in a way that is going to make some sustainable long-term positioning for the third sector. And so part of going through this process of the pandemic and working in this coordinated crisis effort, what it's highlighted for us as Bank of Bermuda Foundation, and it may be highlighting it for others in the sector, is we really need a strong third sector backbone organization, a brand new model for the sector that really is supporting the sector in a way that is not just advocacy, which by itself is very important, but is also research, it's data gathering, it's really identifying the need in the community, it's measuring the value and impact of the sector. It is really also looking at how nonprofits can collaborate, can be collective and efficient with the way that they work, so that we can sustain this very important work that really enriches the community as a whole.
And guys, in the short term, I think we have to work out this balance. We have to work out how do we sustain, keep people afloat, get money and meals and all these sorts of services to people right now in real time and sustain it for 3 to 6 months. And we also have to work out that balance of not letting our vital third sector infrastructure completely fall apart. And yes, some choices will have to be made. Let's keep it real. Of course, all choices are being made in all of the sectors, right? But they're all hurting. And this sector in particular, that now we can see has done such a lift in terms of being nimble and getting that stuff done. We got to find that balance. Yeah. We're going to have to, it's not over, right? Everybody knows it's not over, but if you're hungry, you know it's not over. If you're unemployed, you know it's not over. Absolutely. So we need to find that balance. And then as Alice is saying, there's kind of middle to longer term view about how do we now use what we've learned and put in place the kind of structure so that we're all not like scrambling to make sure, like we already know, boom, essential service, emergency effort. That's what we're doing this. This, sustain 3 months. And who knows, this whole shelter thing could go up and down. So we might have to just put in place those extra supports, boom, again. So we've got this rhythm, we've got this plan. We drew on all of our collective history of work and how we've always worked around hurricanes, layered a pandemic on top of that, have managed through the crisis. And now here we are. We know we now have probably about 3 to 6 months of where are we headed with reconstruction or renewed construction?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Perhaps a new way of doing things. I mean,
Absolutely.
some people are saying, we, this remote working is working for us,
Mhm.
right? So that's going to be a whole game changer in terms of how we do work, how we approach all of these different elements, including giving. Right? There's some financial.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I like a term that you used, Dr. Virgil, which was healthy worry. It's important to be honest and keep in mind, hey, we do have a little bit of concern about what this is going to look like after, and sort of how long we can maintain this current situation. But at the same time, we have a certain level of optimism, right? Based off of the donations that have made to you thus far, based off of the support that's been provided. So we're a little bit concerned and a little bit worried, but at the same time, we are confident that we'll be able to find a way to get through this. And I appreciate that message. Now, you may not realize, because we've had such a productive conversation, but we've been on for just about 30 minutes now.
Oh
and
my gosh!
to begin to wrap it up so that we can get to our next segment. But before we do that, Dr. Virgil, I did promise you a question about vital signs. I'm hoping maybe you can tie that in between you and Allison into your final thoughts. How, looking forward, is this vital signs report going to change? What sort of things need to be done now? And what are sort of your parting words as we look into the future? And as you say, shift now from a crisis immediate response mode into sort of forward thinking and recovery.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the question. So, vital signs as a study, which was, we started in 2018, it's something that we revisit all the time, but it really, we ask the community via survey, what's important to you and what are some of the things within those areas of importance you would want to see changed or improved. And we got priorities. Now, to be honest, these are not, they're not skyrocket sort of responses. They're things like, we want to ensure we have better and affordable health care. We want to ensure that people are educated. We want to ensure that when we're doing workforce development, it ends in either better skilled people and a job at the end of the day want to be employed. So these are not, they're not like new, but it's the way of doing it in a standardized, evidence-based way, based on what other jurisdictions are doing is new, to be honest with you. And what it also says is that when we're funding as a foundation, and when we're advising donors, we want to start directing people towards funding whatever they wish, but towards a priority, and then asking what was achieved as a consequence of that funding? What change did we actually bring about? So that when we redo this study in 3 more years, I think it is, then we're going to see and be able to track those improvements and then be able to say, do we still have more work to do? So that's vital signs in a nutshell. And frankly, how we do our giving as a community foundation, we think about those priorities and apply them on top of our process, so that we're asking those questions about when we are resourcing or funding a program, how do we know that we've made change, and what is that change, right? So those are important questions to ask whenever you put a donation or an investment into something. And so even with the emergency fund, we've been really careful and thoughtful about ensuring that we put information on the website so people can see what are the key areas and to what extent have they been funded. That's really important. What services have been provided. That's good community foundation practice, but that's also good for the community to start to see this is what your collective efforts have done. And again, it wasn't just the emergency fund. There were a group of donors from the corporate sector who helped with the hospital. People may not know that. There were meal programs that ran outside of the emergency fund. But this huge community effort, I think, is what has brought us through to this point where now we can start thinking about sustaining. Yeah. And it's a slightly different nuance what sustaining looks like, but sustaining is important, right? We now know we got a couple of more months, and we got to figure out a sustained and thoughtful way, a balanced way of approaching. And that's what we're about. So
yeah. I know you're running tight on time, so I just want to wrap up and say, from the vital signs work for us as a foundation, we've been starting to look at that work to try and embed it into our process. We're still going through a process of prioritization and evaluation of that work, because it's critical for us as a foundation. We are investing, and we use that word intentionally because we want to see a return, and that is the return as an impact to the community. And so in order to do that, we need to be able to have some measurements of outcomes, and that vital signs work leads into that for us as an organization. I just want to also thank our board, who has been incredibly supportive, engaged in this work, and I look forward to sitting down with them on Thursday to go through this COVID crisis and really talk about what we're going to do as a foundation going forward.
Thank you very much.
And Erin and Ryan, can we do a shout out, please?
Go ahead.
Okay, so you know what? Just because we haven't had time to be publicizing any stories or anything like that, but the Third Sector Coordinated Crisis Response Team, and I'll do it by organization. It's the Bank of Bermuda Foundation, the Community Foundation, but also Age Concern Bermuda, the interagency. Oh my God!
For children and families.
For children and families, thank you. IEC, Nicola, and then we had two private individuals, Tina Nash, Danielle Riviere, and am I forgetting anybody? So,
well, just Vivian, but you
and so Vivian, Carter, and Allison both deployed their resources from the foundation. The Community Foundation loaned me to this effort. So when we say coordinated, we're doing this on top of our work, right? So because we knew that we needed to somehow all get on the same page. And all get on the same page in terms of collecting money and dispersing it and using all of our access points to make sure that it got where it needed to be. So I just want to kind of shout that out.
Of
and
course,
thank the donors and thank the community and thank everybody, because it wasn't just us. We've had people stepped right up into, well, let's help get this food delivered in like hundreds of meals, not just a few, 100, 150 at a serving, 400. 500, that's big. And so some of the nonprofits and community groups just step right into that space, the churches. And I don't think we can say enough, because we need to keep going.
Yes,
so nobody feels left out of that, what that has meant.
Absolutely. And I just want to thank the two of you for having us on, because it's important that people understand the depth and breadth of the work that is still ongoing, very much ongoing.
Yeah.
One thing is clear is that you both are passionate individuals, and what you need in the third sector is passionate individuals. So that's a relief to hear. It is comforting to know that you guys are hard at work. So thank you for your hard work on behalf of not only our listening audience, but also the beneficiaries, which, as you know, Allison, include Ryan and myself.
Shout out to alumni.
Yes.
And so we're grateful for your time, and we wish you the best as you move forward, and thank you for your continued work and efforts. Ryan?
Yeah, and no worries if you think you missed anybody, Dr. Virgil, because I believe we've had some banners going across the screen thanking certain people. And we can see from our live feedback and commentary, we've had some comments come in from Shaz Wolf, who says, Bank of Bermuda Foundation is awesome. I had contact about 30 years ago as a single mother, and it's glad to see that they're still going strong. We had somebody else ask where they can find support, and Tina Nash, who's an absolute gem, commented right in and said you can find all the details on the Facebook page, Third Sector Coordinated Crisis Response Effort. And Tamalita Joseph also says Bank of Bermuda Foundation, Equity for All. Thank you. So thank you very much, Dr. Myra Virgil, Managing Director of the Bermuda Community Foundation. Thank you very much, Ms. Allison Towlson, Managing Director of the Bank of Bermuda Foundation. It's been a great 35-minute chat with you. We hope that the general public enjoyed the discussion and interview. Yeah, it was so great that we didn't even notice time passes by. But honestly, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. I'm sure the community thanks you as well. And have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Gentlemen. Thank you for the time.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, that was a good discussion, Erin. It's
I mean, time flies.
Yeah. It's important to hear from our third sector, right? Because we talk about international business and the private sector, and we talk about government and their response, but sort of all throughout the midst of it is you have those dedicated, passionate people who are out there volunteering and coordinating different emergency responses. And so we're very grateful to have the opportunity to speak with them.
No, exactly, Ryan. I thought that was really important to get that information out there. As you say, some of the headline topics sometimes can overshadow the important and invaluable work that these organizations and individuals do. I thought that Dr. Virgil and Ms. Towlson, demonstrated the fact that they have an extreme passion for the work that they did. And so I know that our listening audience definitely benefited from the information. But moving swiftly on to the second segment of our 3-segment show today, we've got some nurses on the line, and we'll bring them on board. I think they're standing back in the back backdrop here.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they join us on screen momentarily, and then we can introduce them and get them to introduce themselves and what they're doing.
So we had some discussion last week for International Nurses Day, right? And we spoke to some of those nurses. We've had some conversation about education as well. So I think it's timely, Erin, like you say, that we have for our next segment here, some nurse educators. So in particular, and we'll get them up on screen shortly, we have Mrs. Kathy Ann Swan, who's a registered nurse and the director of nursing at Bermuda College. We have Ms. Renee Faulcon, who's a registered nurse and nursing lecturer at Bermuda College, and Ms. Karen Grant-Simmons, who's an adjunct nursing lecturer at Bermuda College, and also the clinical manager of acute community mental health services at the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute. Good afternoon, ladies. Can you introduce yourselves so that we know who's who? One of you, I think, are muted. Can the other two of you hear us?
Yes,
Hi,
I can.
you. Good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. So the two of you at the bottom of the screen without the orange wall, if you could just identify yourselves and let us know who's who.
Okay, I'm Renee Faulcon. I'm nursing lecturer at Bermuda College.
Okay.
Karen Grant-Simmons, adjunct nursing lecturer, Bermuda College, clinical manager, acute community mental health services at the Mid-Atlantic.
Okay, thank you, Karen. So last but not least, we must have Mrs. Kathy Ann Swan, who's the director of nursing education. Can you hear us okay?
I think that Nurse Swan has got to unmute herself, so hopefully she, well, she won't hear us. Well, actually, you can still hear us, but we won't be able to hear her, so hopefully she can hear us and press the unmute button on her screen. But I guess we can start with our other two guests. Can you guys tell us a bit about the nursing program up there at Bermuda College?
Sure, I'll take that question on. So yes, the nursing program at Bermuda College has been in existence for almost 10 years now. I think I started in 2013, but Ms. Kathy Ann Swan, when she comes on, she can tell you the work that she has done over the years to get the program started. The program consists of students completing arts and science courses first. That's the prerequisites that they have to complete. So that will be like your English, your math, social sciences, natural sciences, and mainly like your biologies, anatomy and physiology, microbiology, medical nutrition. Once the student has completed the prerequisites, they're able to be admitted into the nursing program and complete the nursing courses. Completion of the courses will award the student with an Associate of Science in Nursing degree. So that's basically the program in a nutshell.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Ms. Renee Faulcon.
I wanted to know whether Nurse Swan, whether she can hear us, whether she's unmuted herself as yet.
You
can hear us, but we still can't hear you, Nurse Swan. No, so just feel free. I would suggest keep working on it, and if you're able to get your mic unmuted, then just jump in, and we'll be able to add you in the conversation.
Nurse Grant-Simmons, can you tell us a bit about what you do, particularly in respect of your mental health aspect of your profession? Can you tell us a bit more about that? And then I'm going to have some questions on how COVID-19 has affected the work that you do.
Well, for me as an adjunct lecturer, I teach psychiatric nursing. That syllabus entails covering the diagnostic criteria for varying mental disorders, utilizing the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition by the American Psychiatric Association. The students also have to complete mental status assessments, interpret mental health clients' history and behavior to formulate and characterize nursing diagnosis. They have to choose expected outcome for clients, work collaboratively with a multidisciplinary team to develop treatment plans, implement evidence-based nursing interventions, evaluate to the extent how did their expected outcome, to the extent how was it met. Also, they have to learn about the legal and ethical basis of care, voluntary versus involuntary treatment, utilization of the Mental Health Act. Therapeutic communication is also very important, how we speak to the mentally ill. And a lot of the NCLEX-based questions are based on therapeutic communication. One rule of thumb for any nurse that is sitting the NCLEX exam is that you don't ask why questions in psychiatry, because that lets the client become defensive. It is like I'm asking you, why didn't you do the breakfast this morning? Why are you late for work this evening? So instead we will say, what happened this morning? What do you have against your medication? So they have to go through all those varying experiences.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much for that, Ms. Nurse Karen Grant-Simmons. Can you speak? You're both nursing lecturers up at the college. Do you do things outside of the lecturing as well? So, for example, Nurse Grant-Simmons, you're the Acute Community Mental Health Services Clinical Manager at Maui. What exactly does that entail?
I'm coordinating care for clients out into the community. So we have to look at primary prevention, which is health promotion, secondary prevention, which is treatment, and also tertiary prevention, which is rehabilitation, trying to get clients back to where they were before.
Thank you. And Nurse Kathy Ann, can you hear us now, or can we hear you? You want to try one more time? Okay, I don't think we're able to get Mrs. Kathy Ann Swan, but we're grateful for the other two guests who are still here with us. And perhaps you'll be able to fill in where needed when it comes to the education conversation. So you're both lecturers up at the college. What has the demand been like before this? I mean, we've had International Nurses Day last week. Certainly nurses play a fundamental role as it relates to the current coronavirus crisis. What is the situation when it comes to nursing education in Bermuda? How has the demand been, and how has teaching been affected by it?
Okay, I can answer the issue on teaching because Karen works at MWI, but this is my full-time job. So I'm fully immersed in the nursing education role at Bermuda College. But when we received the news that we had to switch from in-class to online learning, we had to rethink how we were going to present the course content to the students. For me, I teach mainly medical surgical nursing. I also teach fundamental nursing, and each of those courses have a clinical component and a lab component to that. So switching from the theory to online learning was not such a challenge for me because I have 10 years experience with online education. So I felt it was an easy switch, but there were some faculty members at Bermuda College, which it was a learning curve for them, and they had to learn how to do online education using video conferences, and Zoom was the main platform that we used. For me, the challenge came with the hands-on part. Normally in our clinical or lab setting, the students are doing hands-on practical work. They're doing skills, they're learning how to administer medications, therapeutic communications with the clients, inserting Foley catheters, and various skills. So I had to think and make a quick switch, like how can I teach the practical skills using online? So what I decided to do was kind of use the resources that I had, PowerPoint, using Google. They have Google Forms, Google Images, and put it all in a case study so that the students are able to learn from the case studies without having the lab or the simulation piece to it. They also have their own supplies at home. So they carry a nursing bag with them that has all of their supplies that they need to perform certain skills in the clinical setting or in the lab. So it was kind of cute to see the students use these supplies on their stuffed animals in the home. So to administer medication, they had the stuffed animal in front of them. They're talking to the stuffed animal as if they were talking to a patient. So I thought that was really interesting how they used their imagination to be able to perform the skills that they would normally do in a lab or in the clinical setting.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Is there a delay here?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a delay, but you can go ahead, Eron.
No, I was just going to say, that's very informative. What particularly, and I don't know if this has been discussed as yet in the Bermuda College context, but how do you see the education, the practical hands-on aspect of nursing education changing post-COVID-19 in light of some of the restrictions and guidelines that we have for personal interaction?
Well, as far as nursing education, yes, we have to sort of rethink and reinvent sort of how we do the practical at this moment in time. And generally, during any sort of crisis, students are not allowed in the clinical setting, and that's understandable because they don't have the experience to manage it. But it's also a learning experience for students. So they are right now learning about COVID-19 and how it can affect patients. Some of them are volunteering in various areas, so they are gaining the experience. So once they're ready to get out there and become the RN, they already have the tools that are available to them to kind of just jump right in and learn about caring for patients that are experiencing the virus, coronavirus that's going around. However, as far as in the classroom, Karen can also speak to this as well. We have to kind of rethink how we're presenting the course. Right now, well, before coronavirus, we were standing in front of a class and we were talking to students. Students were in front of us, but now we have to do things online. We have to do things through Zoom and just rethink how we are presenting the information. So instead of, as I said before, in a practical situation, the hands-on, we now have to use the resources that are online. And there are numerous resources for education. You just have to look out for them. Bermuda College has been very instrumental in helping us use the online platform Zoom to help us deliver the courses. And so those are some of the things that we are using. But like I said, there's plenty online resources for educators out there that they can use to help with the course delivery. And Karen can probably speak to a little bit more as well.
Sometimes also you have to use online scenarios, vignettes. So these are like case studies, case presentations, and then you will ask the students questions in order to stimulate their critical thinking, knowledge, and skills. But the clinical experience, the practicum, is very much important because the student has to be able to demonstrate that they are able to apply theory to practice. You might have an A student in the classroom. That doesn't mean that they'll be able to carry out those procedures when it comes on to practicum. So the practice is very much important.
Well, it's very refreshing to hear how Bermuda College has adapted and shifted in light of the crisis. I mean, nurses certainly are important now more than ever when it comes to treating patients and making sure we all stay healthy. So it's refreshing to hear that despite some of the physical spaces being closed down, that we're still able to deliver education and produce some high quality nurses. As we begin to wrap up with you, Nurse Renee Faulcon and Nurse Karen Grant-Simmons, and thank you for your time thus far, I just want to leave you with another question. How can people get involved? What would you say to perhaps some of the Bermudians out here who are looking for maybe a career change in light of the current crisis, who'd like to become a nurse? Does Bermuda College provide all of the resources necessary to become a qualified nurse in Bermuda? And if so, what are the next steps? What would you say to our listeners who may be interested in a career in nursing?
Okay, that's a very great question, Ryan. Thank you so much for that. And Bermuda College is equipped at this moment to have students come in to our nursing program and achieve an Associate of Science in Nursing degree. So if any person is interested in becoming a registered nurse, they can certainly call the Bermuda College 236-9000, and you can speak with Ms. Kathy Ann Swan, or you can speak with the recruiter, or they can speak with myself to get further information on the requirements to enroll in the nursing program. They have to be mindful that they do have to take prerequisites first. So making sure that they understand that they have to take the English, the math, and the sciences prior to coming into the nursing program. It is a very rigorous program. Once the students complete the program, they're eligible to sit for what we call the NCLEX, which is the external exam that all nurses must take on this side of the world in order to be licensed as a registered nurse. Once they become licensed as a registered nurse, they're eligible to apply to the Nursing Council, Bermuda Nursing and Midwifery Council, to gain their licensure or registration here in Bermuda. And they are eligible to work at the hospitals here in Bermuda. So yes, they can certainly call to Bermuda College and get information on what they need to do and the prerequisites that are needed to get into the nursing program.
Well, thank you very much. Did you have
And I would also
add?
like to add for mental health, after completing that Associate of Science degree in general nursing, then we have an $80,000 scholarship for persons who wish to pursue a Bachelor of Science in nursing mental health. So $40,000, 2-year program, $40,000 each year, $80,000 by BHP.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So unfortunately, Erin, we didn't get to hear from Mrs. Kathy Ann Swan, who's the Director of Nursing Education up at the college. We did have some technical difficulties, but I would say that Nurse Renee and Nurse Karen, you both did a great job of filling in where needed. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you on today's show. We're refreshed and feeling empowered when it comes to the quality of nurses in Bermuda. We had some great ones on last week, and we had some more great ones on today. So thank you very much for sharing your time with us and shedding some light on nursing education in Bermuda.
Yes, can I just say one last thing? I'm sorry, but this week would have been graduation for all students at Bermuda College. So I want to wish them all well. They have completed a successful year, not only in nursing education, but also at Bermuda College. So I want to say congratulations to all Bermuda College graduates.
Absolutely. And congratulations to you for teaching them. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. So we did have some nice comments here from the general public. Judith Parsons says, thank you, nurse educators. And Lovette Pemberton says, excellent talks. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Nurse Renee. Thank you very much, Nurse Karen. Enjoy your afternoon, and we appreciate you sharing your time with us.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, Erin, it's always nice to hear from some nurses. You can never get enough of them because no matter what's going on, they always have a positive attitude, a smiling face, and they very much just sort of light up the room, or in this case, light up the internet or the computer screen or whatever you want to call it. And thank you very much to those ladies. Mrs. Kathy Ann Swan, who had some technical difficulties, who's the Director of Nursing Education up at the college. Nurse Renee Faulcon, who's the nursing lecturer, and Nurse Karen Grant-Simmons, who's the adjunct nursing lecturer, as well as the clinical manager of acute community mental health services at Maui. We had some more nice comments come in from Andrea Trim. Thank you, ladies. Great information. Elka Gibbs, congratulations, Bermuda College. And Jared Rigo, who says, lovely nursing leaders at Bermuda College. So thank you very much. Erin, what's up with you?
No, so I mean, I know that we're going to steamroll on. I mean, we're at the hour mark now. We're going to steamroll on right to Dr. Weldon, who's in the background. I thought that it's a good mix. We had it starting off with the third sector, another follow-up from our nurses, and now we've got the individual who's leading the government's testing lab here in Bermuda as it relates to COVID-19 in Dr. Carika Weldon. So I think without further ado, we'll introduce her, welcome her. I know that she's backstage, so Dr. Weldon should be joining us on the screen shortly. Dr. Weldon, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Good to see you, Ryan and Erin. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, you're the woman of the hour, I would say, Dr. Weldon, the star of the current show. We've heard a lot about you over the past couple of weeks and your assistance in Bermuda government's response to this current pandemic. So thank you. We're sure you're very busy for sharing your time with us, and we're excited to have you on today's series as our final guest.
Thank you. I was actually enjoying watching from backstage just now, so I'm looking forward to what we might get into, actually. But I want to just say as well, my name has been said a lot, but I want to make sure that today I put the actual due respect to those who are actually doing the work as well. So I have a long list later, so make sure I get that in before I finish.
Sure.
Absolutely. Dr. Weldon, can you tell us a bit? I know that we've seen your name in the papers. We've seen you at a press conference. But for those who haven't and those who are tuned in right now, can you tell us a little bit about what your role is right now, what you're doing up there at the Southside Lab?
Okay, so I have 3 roles at the moment. The main one is to actually lead the second testing lab that was established in Bermuda, which is the Bermuda Government Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory, also known as MDL. Then I am also the science advisor to the government. And so anything that has to do with the scientific background to how the testing works, where the science community is in terms of testing, all of that type of remit is mine. And then also I am actually in charge of the swabbing site at Southside and had to kind of get that up and running, working alongside Dr. Amne Ossaran, which has been very awesome, and Mr. Stephen Tucker, who is the logistics coordinator. Dr. Amne Ossaran is the clinical coordinator or medical officer there. So that's the 3 kind of roles I have. And obviously collecting the samples is very integral into doing the testing. And so those 2 things kind of go hand in hand. So that's what I do.
Well, how do you balance the 3? I mean, it sounds like you just listed 3 full-time jobs there, Dr. Weldon. Have you had a science advisor to the government before? Are you the first, or how does all of this work together in 24 hours in a day?
Right. So as far as I know, there has never been a science advisor to the government. I think that COVID-19 has shown that shown Bermuda that we need science more. And being a scientist and being an advocate for science, I was very pleased to be able to fill that role. So yeah, I think I'm the first one. That is not as straining, I would say. I do have meetings weekly. We have an advisory panel, and I do have to just, communicate with the government very often, the cabinet. But more so, the burden is actually the testing and the swabbing site, because we run that multiple days a week. I am also not just directing the lab, but I am on the bench as well. So this week, for the last couple of days, I've been doing the night shift, actually. So all the samples that come in, I would then do at the end of the day. And my great lab assistants, we are there till probably like 1 to 2 in the morning, making sure we get them done. Wow. So it is a lot. Luckily today, I do not have to go into the lab. The only thing I have to do is to have a lovely chat with you gentlemen. I'm answering emails and I'm answering the lab phone, which is sponsored by Digicel, by the way, our mobile phone. But other than that, I'm not going into the lab. So today is a good day.
Well, I hope you're getting some sleep, Dr. Weldon. I mean, I don't know how much time you have with us today, but I know Eron and I were excited to speak to you, and we have quite a few questions, but it definitely sounds like you have a lot on your plate, so we're grateful for you for taking up the time. And as you can see, we're seeing a lot of comments rolling in, a lot of people sending their thank yous and appreciation.
Well, I'm glad to be of use, and I think one of the defining moments for me has been that, the subject I went to study, which at the time wasn't very clear how I could help Bermuda. And I was asked a lot, okay, well, how is a biochemistry degree supposed to help Bermuda? And I was like, I don't know, but it's what I enjoy. Obviously, when I went to school, some people may not know this, but I actually intended to go away to become a medical doctor. My plan was to apply when I was here at high school, but I didn't get in. But my whole career was over after that. So I got rejected from medical school. Yep. 4 of them in the UK. And then I did get into other schools in the US and Canada, but I wanted to really go to the UK. So I went to do medical biochemistry as a backup not a backup, more like a plan B to then get into medicine, but then fell in love with the research side. And so that's where I've stayed. But it's for me surreal to see what I went to study is able to directly help the country. And I think that's something I've really taken on, and a lot of young people doing science have said thank you. Thank you for blazing the trail. So I'm just humbled.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Weldon, I think you've had a lot of interviews in the past, and you've been in the press, and I think we've sort of seen a lot about what you're actually doing. So I was hoping, Eron, unless you think otherwise, I was hoping to focus this interview a lot on your own personal experience and sort of how you've dealt with this current situation, because a lot of the statistical stuff is already out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But while you did mention your biochemistry degree, and before we get into the meat of the conversation, do take a moment, just talk to us briefly. How has your biochemistry degree been applied? Because I know we see you and we say Dr. Weldon, she's from Oxford, she's working down there at the testing site, but I want you to just connect that with sort of what you went to study and what you're doing currently. You did mention briefly You're the science advisor to the premier, you're running the testing site, and you're also doing some of the different shifts with the swabbing. But can you be a bit more specific into how your degree and your particular qualifications apply to the role that you're currently occupying?
Yeah, so this is probably where I'll talk my head off. I do enjoy talking, by the way.
I will stop you if it's too long.
Okay. So I went to do medical biochemistry as my undergraduate. And what that means is biochemistry is all the chemical reactions that happen in human life. And so in studying that, I was more focused on medical, so those in humans. In that degree is when I actually first learned about PCR. So I think everyone has heard PCR a lot in the last couple months, because that's the test that we do. That was when I first learned about it. And that's when I first did it. We actually had to do that in our practicals in undergraduate. And then going forward, I went to do my degree, my PhD at the same place, and did it in biochemistry. And again, there is when I would say mostly what I've applied from my PhD. I know people keep calling me doctor. Really, all that happened was I went and did experiments for 3 years, and then I wrote it up. And
all you did was experiment for 3 years, and then I wrote it up.
And that's literally what happens with a PhD. You
but you said it like that's nothing. Don't downplay.
I know. But I really want to put it into perspective, because a lot of people, obviously I worked hard for it, but it's not unattainable by everyone else.
Yeah, it was only 3 years of experiments that you did, and how many words was the paper?
40,000. But it's a lot to say. It's 3 years. It's a lot to write about. You know,
right.
So
do you recall doing any 40,000 word essay in law school?
Eron, the most I did was 12,000, and that's something that people do on a regular. So this all I did was 3 experiments over 3 years and 48,000 words. Come on, doctor.
You know, what I'm trying to convey is that it's not something that isn't attainable by others. I've had a passion. There was a project that I really loved, and I had a supervisor, and we would work our way through it. Okay, we did this experiment, we got this result. Let's go this way and pursue this experiment. And it just kept going like that. And you do that for 3 years, and then you have to obviously put it all together and write it up and defend it in a Bible, which is like a 3-hour interview. But I would say during that time, really what I've gathered and used now is 2 skills, 2 of them. Number one, you learn that it's a long haul deal. You're not there. It's not a quick, do an experiment, that's it. You have to keep going, and you have to think about it long term. And in this pandemic, you've heard it a lot of the time, it's not a sprint, right? It's a race. And I think I've really had to apply that here. And the other thing is actually handling a lot of samples at once. Now, I've never, prior to this, handled clinical samples, and I'll make that clear. I was never on the clinical side. I was doing the basic science. But the exact same principle of me handling during my PhD, maybe 190 samples at once for my experiment, now I'm doing that, but it's 190 patient samples for testing. So it's been a direct kind of like transfer of skills from my PhD to what I'm doing now. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. We just wanted to get an understanding of sort of how your current education has been applied, and why, for example, there are thousands of people in the country that are doing it. So I know that you were trying to remain humble by talking about what you had to do to get your doctorates, but certainly if there were plenty of people who could do what you did, then you wouldn't necessarily be, the person that we're looking to for answers and for guidance. So I think it's important to state that as well. Eron, did you have any particular questions about her current work or education before we move on to sort of her personal experiences?
Well, yes, and I think it ties into the humility that we can see coming through the screen, and that all our listeners can hear and see, is that Dr. Weldon, you are responsible you're leading the task of the science. You're the science advisor for the government. You're leading the Southside lab there. We, particularly myself, during questioning during the Bird News interviews, or not interviews, the press conferences, had asked some rather hard-hitting questions with respect to another lab. You mentioned that you were the second of 2 labs. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the question was asked of the government how much another lab was being paid, and that was a figure of $91,000 a month. And I know that, for instance, you run a charitable foundation, the Bermuda Principles Foundation. And so I wondered, and I don't know what your response is going to be, but I wondered, is it similar? Are you being paid something similar to that? Or what is your arrangement for compensation for your effort? You mentioned 3 tasks, 3 heads that you were responsible for on a day-to-day basis. We don't even know how you have the time to be here with us today. But my question to you is, are you being paid for the work that you're giving the government?
The short answer is no. So I am the science advisor, but I am on a peppercorn contract, so I don't get any compensation. It was $1 officially, but that's the arrangement for that. And then for the testing, I personally, when I do the test, it costs the government nothing. The only cost that I have incurred for the government is to get me to Bermuda, which I came on the airbridge flight, so that was not too much. And then also my accommodation, because I didn't want to stay with my family and put them at risk. And gas for the car that I need. But other than that, hasn't been any other expenses. And then for the third, I guess, job of managing the swabbing site, no, I have come to realize that this is my time to give back. That's how I see it. I was awarded 2 scholarships actually during my studies. The undergraduate Sir Henry Tucker Scholarship from Bank of Bermuda Foundation, and then the Sir Arthur Dudley Sperling Butterfield Postgraduate Scholarship. And I wouldn't be Dr. Weldon if it wasn't for that. And so for me to be Dr. Weldon, fantastic, but really the proof is in the pudding of me being able to give back. And I don't think personally I would feel okay knowing my fellow Bermudians are suffering. I am a professional, yes, my services are worth something, but I just feel personally more, I feel better knowing that I'm actually giving back to the country in the exact way that I was trained in a global pandemic. And for me, that's fine. I sleep very well at night.
I think that's very noble, but how are you getting by? So for example, Dr. Weldon, if this continues, let's say for months now, I mean, I'm sure when you came back, you were very eager to apply your expertise and knowledge, but this may very well turn into a full-time role. How are you getting by? Do you have other jobs, or are you being sponsored? I mean, I understand your accommodation is taken care of, but how long do you see yourself keeping this up if this situation continues?
So what I will point out is that me being here, I had to be approved from my job in the University of Oxford to come here to kind of be on approved leave. My job at the moment is involved in the COVID-19 response in England. Everyone in the team, so I work in a sequencing lab, and so they are actually a part of the UK consortium that is doing the genomic sequencing of the virus. And so they are already in pandemic response. And my boss said, you know what, Carika, it's better you go home to Bermuda, because he's actually came for one of the conferences last year. Go home and help your country. That's fine. And so I still get paid my Oxford salary. So I'm not making more, I'm not making less. I'm still able to pay my rent in the UK while I'm here. But for me, that's enough. I'm not here to do more than just to give back. You know, I think that's the Bermudian way. We want to help each other. And I think this is the crucial time that for me, I want to do that. And that's what I've chosen.
So I guess if you look at it one way, it's almost like you're on secondment. You still have a full-time job
exactly.
And you've come back to help out for the time being. Okay, I can understand that.
So I'm not like got a whole bunch of bills in the UK that when I get back, I'm scratching my hair like, oh my God. No, that's not the case. But obviously I know that my skill set here in Bermuda, I would get paid a lot more for what I do, but that's not really where my mindset is right now. I just want to be able to help, because people are dying. So far, out of sadly the 9 deaths in Bermuda, I have been close to 2 of them, and I've lost my great aunt, who was actually in Panama the day after I arrived. She was in Panama with her husband. I think you've seen them in the media quite a lot, well, the husband. So it's directly affected me, and for me, I couldn't really put a number on that. I would rather just give back and try to stop anyone else from feeling the loss of a family member.
Now, Dr. Weldon, I want to take this up a notch, and I hope you're not offended, but I do think that it's important that we don't breeze over this, right? Because, I mean, we're seeing a lot of Bermudians comment right now where they're saying, thank you, you're so humble, and thank you for your selflessness. And I think that's all fine, right? But I think we have to contrast that and juxtapose that with some of the recent happenings that have occurred since you've arrived on island. So you told us today, for example, that you're doing this volunteer, right? You're not getting paid. You're wearing 3 hats. You're using your doctorate's degree to advise the premier. You're running a testing site, and you're on the ground as a soldier, putting your boots on the ground, swabbing yourself, right? And you're doing all of this for free, voluntarily.
I'm not swabbing. Just want to clear. I'm not doing the swabbing. I'm just making sure that all happens right. But you're
coordinating it.
Doing the testing. in the lab. Yeah.
Okay.
You might be causing other happenings, Ryan.
Yeah. Before we hear any more allegations, so thank you for that clarification. But my point is, Doc, you're wearing 3 different hats. You've traveled all the way over here. You did 2 weeks in quarantine. You've left your job temporarily. You're here volunteering day after day. You just said you're working the night shift. And a lot of Bermudians, the response so far in the general public and on social media has been very positive. We're seeing a lot of thank yous, and we're so grateful. And look at this awesome young Black Bermudian woman. And I think that's all fine and dandy, right? But the thing that concerns me, and I'm tying it into the fact that you're volunteering, is sort of the way that we view or use the expertise of our young Bermudians. And I say this because it probably wouldn't be as much of an issue if you only received positive feedback and support. You know, here's a young Black Bermudian woman who's come back, she's applying her degree to come back and help the community. That's fine. People do that all the time, right? But over the past few weeks, Eron and I have observed certain happenings and certain tensions that have been inflamed throughout the community. You've been questioned for your credentials, for example. People have challenged your experience and your qualifications. There have been allegations made that people didn't want to work with you, for example, or people were having issues with giving you the tools that you needed to work. And I'm wondering how we tie that in with the fact that you're volunteering. So do you feel, for example, that there's a risk in sort of embracing this humility and nobleness and nobility and selflessness? Is there a risk that perhaps people may take that for granted and sort of not value you for the expertise that you're contributing?
I think that is a risk, but it's a risk I've been willing to take. I do know that when you, okay, to just address what you said, yes, there has been challenges, and I think a lot of them, or not all of them, some of them have been public. I mean, I think I just came out of quarantine, and the question was asked about me doing illegal testing. And I was watching the funny thing is I was watching the press conference and did not see my name coming at the end of that sentence. I was like, what? And so it was just like, how can that be? And, you know, many times the Ministry of Health have had to come out and refute certain things that have been said, because otherwise left would have defamed my character and my integrity. And that's been challenging, and I won't pretend like that hasn't affected me. There have been days when I have just been like, why on earth did I come back? It has made me question, because at the time it's overwhelming. But ultimately, I would rather, in this instance, go through those days where I'm like, this is hard, than to be back in England, where I was actually, in fact. And actually, when it started, I was in Nigeria. And I think you know that, Ryan. I was in Nigeria when it all kind of kicked off, and I was like, I could probably get stuck here, right? That was my thought. I was like, I wouldn't mind being here, because, like, you know, at the time they didn't have any cases. But then I thought, you know what, I would rather go back home and help than to look from afar and be like, oh, I wish I could have helped. So that's where I stand on it. I mean, I have had challenges, and there have been some really concerning.
Can you speak to some of those challenges? I mean, I know you can't probably disclose everything that's happening because you're working under the government right now. But to what extent can you advise? Fill us in. What has been your experience since you've come back? We've seen the public support, but beyond that, what's going on under the covers or beneath the scene?
I can't share what's happening under the covers completely, but what I can say is that, because I think, but as you touched on it, the young aspect. I mean, I read Dirty last week, getting used to saying that, and I think that in Bermuda we have to respect experience rather than age. And although I am 30, I have been in the field of RNA for 10 years. And at the moment, that's quite a lot, right? I have gone to conferences all over the world and spoken, and I know many scientists and researchers, mainly because of the conference that I do. And the field of RNA, which is what the testing is, because you have to convert the RNA virus into DNA and then make more copies. That process is something I have done for a while and actually have published on. So I'm a published scientist, and I think that needs to be looked at more. And for me, I think the shift has come because in the science community, I wouldn't have gone through this. In the science community, you can have a professor, you can have a Nobel Prize winner who respects an undergraduate because of the science. And that's how it is. You don't have to explain yourself. The work speaks for itself. And that's why I said that when I was asked at the press conference, because as a scientist, that's what I'm used to. When you go to a conference, you don't show up and say, oh, I'm the best scientist there is. Oh my God. You show up, you give a talk on your research, and that's where the respect comes from what
and you're saying that didn't align with your experience when you landed in Bermuda?
It didn't align. And I think it might be a reason because Bermuda, we're not very much deep into science. And that's why, for example, as far as I know, the first science advisor. We haven't really had a focus on that, which is. But
is that the reason? Because I'm going to push you here because I really want to understand, in your opinion, what is the why? Why is it? I mean, as far as I see, when I see your credentials and I see the work that you've already been doing, you run your own foundation, the Bermuda Principles Foundation, you've been working at Oxford, you have a doctorate's degree. I mean, as far as I could see, if you had stayed somewhere, for example, Nigeria, let's say, or in the UK, I'm pretty sure that the experts over there would have welcomed you and sort of called you in and maybe even kidnapped you so that you could apply your research and your expertise, right? But the sentiments that I'm getting from you is that when you came home to Bermuda, that was not necessarily your experience. And it seems like, it would be more of an issue if you were maybe getting paid, but you came back to volunteer. And it seems like in some ways you still had to fight to put your foot in the door and assist. Now, correct me if that's not true, but that's the general sentiment that I'm getting. And I really want to understand why. I mean, you've put together the suggestion that maybe it's a science thing, but I would put to you, I mean, Eron and I are law students. I would put to you that if there was some giant constitutional matter and they needed someone in a new area of research, that perhaps other young Bermudians might have this same issue if it were not science related. And go ahead, Eron. I'm just trying to get some discussion on what do you think sort of is the role of young Bermudians in all of this, and how do you tie into it as being reflected by your example? Go ahead, Eron.
To Dr. Weldon's credit, I don't think that that's a question necessarily that I think she's going to find out the reality that Bermuda has, right? But that's not a question really for her per se. I think that it's one of those things that's a straightforward business thing, right? I started off this aspect of the conversation by saying that my question was with respect to another lab and the substantial amounts that lab was being paid. Now, let's say, for example, Ryan, let's just attribute it to law. Say that you're first year called to the bar, right? And you say to the government during a constitutional crisis, I want to offer my services for free. And you have an established, confirmed law firm who has reputable experience, if you will, that's charging a six-figure sum. And then you say, well, I want to offer my services for free. It is business to criticize you. It has absolutely nothing to do with Dr. Weldon's credentials. It has nothing to do with her ability. And I think that it's a shame. And I think that those realities are highlighted in a small place like Bermuda. When in reality, we should be joining together. But that's not really something for Dr. Weldon. I think that that's something for us as a community to look beyond and say, is this really what we're prepared to do to those individuals who go overseas, get qualified, get experience, and come back to lend themselves? Because when Dr. Weldon says, well, look, I've been given 2 scholarships. There's no way that I'm going to charge my country during a national pandemic. That speaks about Dr. Weldon's, her credibility, her integrity, her humility, and what she actually feels. Now, that's not a criticism for somebody who wants to take remuneration for the services that they provide, but it does speak to Dr. Weldon's recognizing that, hey, look, this is something that I stand for. This is something that I believe in. And I think the larger thing that we have to look at as a community is how do we actually deal with situations like this? How are we assessing it? Because Dr. Weldon could have, if she didn't have the mental fortitude and the resilience to say, I'm going to put that to the aside, because there are some days where, Ryan, you and I will get criticism. And it's like, well, why am I doing this? She could have easily said, well, you know what? I'm not being paid. I'm not under a contract per se. So you know what? I didn't want to do this, but go ahead and continue the other arrangement that you had. And that's the risk that we as the populace face when we're criticizing people, not understanding that these professionals are still individuals. So the reality of it is...
I take that point, Eron. And I mean, I didn't want to put all of that pressure on Dr. Weldon to answer in particular in relation to her own personal circumstances. But the reason that I did raise it, Eron, is because I'm thinking, and I don't want to hop on the negative here, but what I'm seeing here is a connection when it comes to young Bermudians, right? We've been dealing as a country with what we've called and dubbed the brain drain for decades now, where we have young Bermudians, for example, Erin, that go overseas or maybe in Bermuda, they get qualified, they go elsewhere and they take their expertise. And some of them have said and reported that they feel more appreciated or they feel more comfortable outside of their own country. And so, Dr. Weldon, I didn't want to put all of that pressure on you to answer this question. I'm sure you don't know the full, reasons behind why the community operates the way that it does in certain respects. But I did think that there was a wider question here of the value that we place on some of our young people and young educated Bermudians.
Yeah, I if I could jump in as well, I think it is a question for us as a community. And I think what I've been told, and this actually was told to me by someone else who had come to my conference, I want to say 2 years ago in 2018, and they saw everything happening. And she said to me, she said, you need to, and you might disagree with this, but I think it was a valid point. She said, you need to stop letting them call you young. So I was like, what do you mean? I am young. I'm not 30 yet. She said, okay, yeah, you are young, as it were. But in this context, young, they're tagging to inexperience. And so the more we say young, I mean, yes, I would say I'm not old. No, I am not as old as I'm not in my 50s or 60s. I'm not saying that's old, but I am younger. But, the connotation of, oh yeah, look at this young girl. Like, it's almost like, oh yeah, she's trying her best. And I think that's maybe a part of the problem is that we have to tag the word young to someone that potentially has more experience than others. And so using that word young, I think, is actually a two-edged sword sometimes.
I understand. So you're saying that when you say you are a young Bermudian, some people interpret that and think an inexperienced Bermudian.
Right.
I don't think that's a reason not to use the word young, because how do you remove the stigma of being young with, if you're not proclaiming it? The fact of the matter is, Doc, last week this time on Tuesday, you went 30 years old. You are a young Bermudian. So if we're removing the word young, then are we now reducing the value that young Bermudians are making as a whole? Shouldn't it be better for us to learn to hear the word young Bermudian and not associate that with a lack of knowledge or a lack of expertise, but instead embrace that and say, that's an empowering thing. Young people are making valid contributions. So that's up to you whether you want to call yourself young or old.
I'm not saying not to call me young, but I just think that is what needs to happen is that link between the word young and inexperience needs to be broken.
Completely agree. And you have to think also about the example that you set, right? There are, whether you identify as young or not, there are other young Bermudians who are genuinely.
I am young, by the way.
Okay, good. We accept that. There are other Bermudians out there, right, who are thinking about applying to school or going to college and going through their studies, who I'm sure are looking up to you and saying, this is somebody that I can identify with. She teaches me at Bermuda Principles, or she came to my school the other day. And so I think it's important for us to not eradicate the word young, but really for us as a community to embrace that and say, my age does not equal my experience or the validity of the contributions that I'm making. And quite the opposite, I would say, is I think it's even more telling that, we very well could have had a 70-year-old doctor come back from Oxford with a degree and come and charge for their services and set up a fancy contract and lab. And yet it wasn't an older person that did it. It was you, a young Bermudian. And so, you have certain quotes that the youth shall lead the way. And I definitely think that this is a very poetic example of that, where we have you, Dr. Weldon, who's come back and made a contribution to our island as a young Bermudian.
And I think just to compound that, Dr. Weldon, you deserve an enormous amount of credit. And I know that you're getting that credit and that respect from members of the community for the stance that you have taken. Because sometimes, whether it's right or wrong, that we have entrenched views in the community as it relates to young people and their experience and the like, we have to acknowledge that that's a fact. We've got to break that cycle. And part of breaking that cycle, Dr. Weldon, even though personally wouldn't be my stance, is the stance that you've taken to say, you know what, this could potentially be a red herring. This could potentially be an issue if I get compensated. You know what, let me put that to the side. I actually don't care to be. Am I qualified enough to be? Yes. But I'm going to break into this entrenched cycle and this entrenched mindset by doing the job. You can never criticize me about the payment that I'm receiving, because I'm not receiving payment. I'm going to do the job. And that's how you'll be judged. That's the credit and the recognition. That's the basis of the recognition and the credit that you get, is that you have completed and you are completing the job to the standard that anybody else who would be collecting a six-figure sum has done. And that is the only test. But speaking of testing, can you just tell us a bit more about the process of that testing that you guys are doing down there at the Southside Lab? What does it involve?
So I'm really happy. Actually, today is the 1 month anniversary of the Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory. So it was good timing. We started on April 19th with doing testing, and our first batch was actually the quarantine group, which I was in. So I was part of the first group that was tested in the lab. I do not do the testing myself only. There are some other staff members who have, for this time period, asked to remain nameless. And I think that's awesome because we're all kind of on the same page as a team. We just want to get the work done. They want to be shown later. But what we do is we have two different types of tests. We have the PCR test, which actually detects if you have the virus currently in your system. And that requires the swab that goes deep in your nose. It's not nice. I'm not going to lie. It is uncomfortable. I have had it 3 times. Yep. I had it again on Sunday, I think, for my 3rd time because I'm, obviously exposed to a lot of samples. But that is the test that is what we're basing if you are COVID-19 positive or negative. At the drive-thru, you can come through, and we have processed over 3,100 people through the drive-thru of Bermuda so far since the 24th of April. So I'm really proud of the drive-thru team. They are awesome. Yeah, and as far as the lab ourselves, we have done just shy of 3,500 individual tests in this first month. The additional test that I think everyone is excited about and talking about is the antibody test. Now, I briefly touched on that at the press conference on the 6th of May. This is looking at your body's immune response. So if you are exposed to the virus in this case, your body will try to get rid of it via your immune system. And the first line of defense against that are your antibodies. They are essentially the first ones to the scene that bind to the virus and call the rest and say, hey, come, let's destroy this. This is not of us. And so if you have that in your blood, then it signifies that potentially at some point you've had exposure. The PCR test is a current snapshot, whereas the antibody test can let us know what's happened in the past. And so at this point, as of yesterday evening, we have done just under 1,000 antibody tests in the general public. And so really excited about that. We're trying to understand the prevalence of the virus in the Bermuda community. And so that's the reason why we're doing that testing. At the moment, we are giving both results out. So the PCR test results, people are able to get via email within 24 hours. Most is between 12 to 24 hours. If you're negative, and if you are negative for antibodies, you would also get an email. And last night was the first batch of emails we sent out for the antibody test. If you are positive, however, because recognizing if you have the virus in your system, that's a very important clinical diagnosis. You need to be counseled by a medical professional. And also, if you have antibodies, if you have antibodies and you never had symptoms, that could be, emotionally damaging. Or if you have antibodies and you had close contact with someone that was vulnerable, that could also be emotionally damaging. And so what we do is all the positive results get sent to your GP, and then your GP will call you and let you know and counsel you at the same time. What we have been able to do is have all the GPs have their own portal to the system, and any person that is tagged as being referred to that doctor, they can see on their portal. And so we've streamlined the whole system, and I'm really happy that this week it seems to be that doctors can see in real time what the results are. They can see if we've received a sample in the lab, they can see if it's in progress, and they can see what the result is. So that's what we're doing. And we are going to do the antibody testing up to the end of the weekend. We had our first batch of tests in. And so if anyone wants to make sure they get that, please do book. The link should come up, I think, at the bottom, and I think it also will be posted. So it's bda.gov/covid.res/quest, and it's quest with a W, not a U.com to book a test. Now I know that a lot of bookings are going, but if you do want to still come, you can walk in We do accommodate walk-ins as well, but bearing in mind that as a walk-in, you may not be offered an antibody test because we are getting a bit more strict.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Weldon. I really admire how you're able to sort of synthesize all of that complex information into something that really the average person in layman's terms can understand. Some of it still went a little bit over my head and hurt my head a little bit,
Yeah.
but I'm sure that the prompts at the bottom of the screen help. Now, Doc, I'm mindful of the time, and I know you need to get some rest before you go back to whatever shift you're doing next. But
I'm not
want us
so this is good.
Okay, good.
There's no samples there, so I have all the
Well, I
time.
hope this is a little bit therapeutic for you, but
It is actually.
we want to switch over into some rapid fire questions if you don't mind in a bit. But before we do that, I do want to get your views on the government response as well, and your current work. But before we do that, just wrapping up from our last sort of topic on age and experience and sort of your credibility and credentials, I want to get some of these live comments up so that we can acknowledge our listeners. Glenda Carlington said, age is nothing but a number. Experience, integrity, humility, compassion, care, and giving will prevail. Dr. Weldon, you are appreciated by me. Judith Parsons, one of our repeat viewers, says, those who are stuck will think young is inexperienced, but I celebrate young people who are progressive thinkers. Thank you very much, Ms. Parsons. Claire Ann Rayner says, Ryan and Aaron, these same words can be attributed to you as well. Thank you very much, Ms. Rayner. We appreciate that. We enjoy doing what we do. And I think this is another one of those very good segments, Aaron, to have another young Bermudian up on screen, Dr. Weldon. We appreciate you. And Zena Edwards says, some questions here that are coming in. Carika Weldon, will you be publishing a paper on the science of the Bermuda pandemic?
So yes, that is something that...
Yeah, we want another 48,000 words, Doc.
It won't be 48. It can't be that long. Papers have word limits. Theses don't. But so at the moment with the antibody testing, we are in the pilot stage. So everyone that's being tested now, we're actually trying to iron out certain things. We want to make sure we ask the right questions. We want to make sure we get the right sample size. We want to make sure we get a randomized sample. So everyone that's being tested now has contributed to that process. But we will be looking to iron everything out. And this is a secondary goal. Obviously, we are trying to make sure we manage the pandemic and we can open the economy up fully. That's the goal of the government. We want to make sure we get Bermuda back on track because we, and I am very aware that some people have suffered very much economically during this time, and that is not up for debate. And so we want to make sure that everyone can get back to where they can and start to recover. But we are, and I say we in terms of the CMO's office and Bermuda Health Council have joined in as well. And you know, BHP, Ethics Committee, we're all kind of making sure that we can get this right so that we can kind of be a player and a leader in science, because at this rate, we have tested, I think, close to 10% of our population almost in PCR testing, and then antibody, we're just about almost going to reach 2%. And I don't think many other countries have done that. So we do want to publish something, but that is definitely something very much secondary.
And on that note, another question was, what is the targeted number or percentage of Bermudians to get tested for the antibodies?
I think that question is, the answer is more about the supply of the test. I think that's been said so many times that the procurement of the testing supplies has always been a challenge. And with antibody tests being the newer kind of, you know, exciting one, that's now the one that's harder to get. So we can only go based off of what we can get. But I think with what we are aiming to get, we should be around 1/6 of the population.
Okay. And I mean, another thing that you raised, which I wanted to segue into, you mentioned sort of economically, people are struggling and you're eager to get people back to work and Bermuda opened up again. The Premier announced last night that we'll be moving into phase 2 on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Do you think that might be a bit too soon? What are your thoughts on sort of us transitioning and opening Bermuda back up again based on your current expertise?
Or was your advice part? I mean,
yeah. Are you trying to make us get back to work, huh?
I was waiting for that. So I was not involved in picking a date. So I also found out last night that it would be Thursday. But I am on an advisory panel, which does meet with the Premier once a week. and we do advise on from our different expertise what we would suggest in terms of. I think our last meeting was about the next phase. My advice was that based off of the numbers, and that's all I can go off of, in terms of the PCR testing, those coming to the drive-through who are asymptomatic, meaning they don't have any symptoms and they don't suspect they have it, based off of what we've done so far, we've only had the one out of over 3,000 tests. To me, that was very indicative that we potentially do not have a bunch of spread going around at the moment. And so that's what my advice was, is that from those numbers, it looks like we have managed it. And I think, in my opinion, the 4-week lockdown did a good job of letting that be flushed out. And on the flip side of that is, with the antibody test, what we are starting to see is that those who were suspected before, or maybe they knew they might have had close contact, are coming up as having it. And I think, had we done this a month ago, so when I first got here, had we jumped right in and started doing community testing and antibody testing, if it was available at the time, I think we would have seen a very different picture. So I think the 4 weeks actually helped quite a lot, because that was 2 cycles to let the virus go out. So just to stress, I did not tell the premier open up on May 21st, but my advice was that from what we're seeing in terms of the PCR testing through the drive-through, which is a snapshot of the general population, it was looking very promising.
So, Dr. Weldon, how we know that Oxford has been so gracious enough to give us and allow us your presence under your contract with them. How long is that going to last? Because it appears, and it's very clear to us, that you're very important to Bermuda as we navigate through this crisis. So how long do we have you for?
That's a good question that I do not know the answer to. I came on a one-way ticket to Bermuda, so I do not know how long I'm here for. I think we're just going to play it by ear, and I think due to the different phases, like I can't leave unless there's a plane. So that's indicative of, I guess, how long I'll be here for. But yeah, at this point, my boss has. I keep in contact with him, on a regular, and he knows what I'm doing. And he said, just let him know. At the moment, they're still in the UK, very much deep into pandemic mode. So it's not like they have moved on and then we're behind, and then I need to get back to work and do my research projects that I have to project manage. But they're also actually deeper into it than we are. So I don't know. That's a good question.
Are there individuals that you work closely with that, for example, let's say post phase 4, we're starting to recover, but it's still important to have the advice of a science advisor and the like. Is there somebody that you could hand over to, or is this something that you believe you could do virtually, for example, once the need for testing has kind of slowed up? So
as far as, I'll go for the three roles I do. So for the testing itself, like I alluded to earlier, I didn't do testing for a while physically. I wasn't actually in the hood working with samples for a while because I was in quarantine. And so all the process up to validating the lab and verifying it and doing all the testing and getting everything, and even my own test to get me out of quarantine, was not done by me. I have a very capable team who are able to get that done. And if I don't want to show up one day, if I say, look, I'm not coming for whatever reason, or should I say, if something comes up and I get called to a meeting, or I get called for another emergency, we still have the capacity to do testing. So I'm very proud of that. For the swabbing site, it runs pretty much without me now, because Dr. Amney and Mr. Stephen Tucker from BLDC have that on lock. So if I also
you were needed to set that up, or
I was needed to set up. So actually, in quarantine is when I was instructed that we want to have a drive-through near your lab, make it happen. And I was like, okay. So I, put the idea together. I found the site on Google Maps, and I drew out how I wanted it to go, and I had the vision in my head of what I wanted it to look like, and that was operationalized very much due to Public Works. In fact. The Minister of Public Works and the PS, they gave me the resources to get that happening. And the first day was a bit rocky. There were some things, like some minor details that I didn't really know about at the time. I wasn't aware of because we hadn't done it before. But we quickly got our act together, and we were able to recover that same day. And by the Saturday, we were running very well. And so, yeah, that was, I guess, my vision. I was instructed, make it happen, and we did. And so when there's issues, like, for example, or when it comes to progressing, So, for example, we were initially writing everything out, and when we got the papers of the samples in the lab, we would then import them into our system. And I said, look, can we try to have them at the check-in of the drive-thru automatically input them into the system? It makes it a lot smoother. And so graciously, due to donations from AF Smiths, they gave us 2 iPads, and now we're able to do that. And so my job is to just make that whole system a lot cleaner, a lot smoother.
I didn't know that you designed the whole, area and the testing side and all that.
Yeah, that was all. And similarly, with the lab, which is, I guess, the one I touched on earlier, is we were given a space in the government central lab at Southside, and the room wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't up to PAHU standards. So I was literally on WhatsApp video chat with the project manager I was assigned to from Public Works, saying, can you put a wall here? Can you put a window there? And we walked through it together. And that was on a Wednesday. I drew a picture. He drew a picture as well, and it matched. So we were on the same page. As of Thursday morning, they started construction, and they finished that on Saturday night. So it took them only 3 days. So but from Wednesday to Sunday is the whole transformation happened, and we were able to start on April 19th.
Okay. I mean, Eron, I'm glad that you asked that question about whether Carika has to return, because, I mean, it really speaks to sort of you as a young Bermudian. I mean, how many people can do what you do, the way that you came back, and were able to switch right into that role. So we're definitely grateful to have you. It makes you wonder, what would we have done without you?
I want to also just say as well, because that has been a source of tension, and I want to just address that and no one has ever stated that, like, I came back and now testing is happening, because I must acknowledge, and I do, that the Helix Lab did an awesome job to get us in a position where the pandemic was announced, I think, on March 12th, I believe. And less than a week later, we had on-island testing due to their services. So we do have capable scientists on island who are doing the actual testing. And that's why we were able to do that from the middle of March and be in such a strong position now. But when it comes to my role, it was about expanding the testing, having a second site, a government lab, which there wasn't a government lab that was able to do this testing. And then on the other side was to add that testing drive-through type of scenario at Southside. For the third job as a science advisor, most of that I was already doing remotely when I was in quarantine because I couldn't go anywhere. So that's definitely something I could do remotely. I had never really thought about passing that on. I would probably have to think who I could do that to. But if I was asked, I would find it out and make sure that happens. My thing is, I am not trying to be the one, right? I don't think that makes sense. The job needs to be done. If it can be done more efficiently by someone else, that's how it goes. And I think that for me, I'm learning in this period to delegate more because I'm not used to doing that. I usually just do everything myself, especially the charity. But I'm learning more, like, let others do it, and it makes the job better. So I would be very happy to hand over if that was what was required.
Right. Now, Carika, Dr. Weldon, rather, I'm mindful of the time, but I do see that there are quite a few more questions. If you don't mind staying on, I know Eron needs to sign off, so thank you very much, Eron.
Dr. Weldon, thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your frank responses. And on behalf of the people of Bermuda and the many that you assist on a daily basis, thank you. When you get off of Ryan, because I don't let him keep you too much longer, but when you get off with him, make sure that you do get some rest because I know that you're working day in and day out. But thank you again for your time. And Ryan, as you say, I do have to go, but I'm going to, as Dr. Weldon just mentioned, handing off, I'm going to hand it off to you to take it from here.
Yeah, and I'll take a few more questions. So thanks, Eron. We'll see you again on Thursday.
All right, bye for now.
Okay, so Carika, I wanted to stay on with you just a bit longer because we did have a few more questions. So I'm grateful for you giving us, we'll do an extra 5 minutes, I think. And thanks to the members of the public for staying with us. So Zena Edwards says, you mentioned the Bermuda Hospitals Board Ethics Committee. Being ethical in science is key. What sort of ethical concerns were considered?
So when it comes to the antibody test, I think there's a few points to worry about. First of all, is that it's a new test. And at the moment, there has been no one in any country or any body that has said, we have mandated mandatory antibody testing, or we are going to put this as a policy. And so even when it comes from WHO, they're also very cautious, realizing that the accuracy of the test is not yet where we want it to be to only do the antibody test by itself. And so because of that, we had to consider if we are going to start doing this, not just to, try to see prevalence, people are going to want to know their result. How do we handle that? And so that is why actually, in fact, when we started on May 9th and the press release went out, it was made clear that those people that were going to take the antibody test were not going to get their results right away. The reason for that delay was because we had to consider these types of scenarios where we would give a result and then that would dramatically emotionally impact on that person. So we wanted to take that week, which was last week, to kind of iron that out. And so, for example, if you have someone who has been isolating, who's vulnerable, and then they have the antibody test and it says they have IgG, which is the longer term immune response, they might automatically think, oh, that means I'm immune, I'm safe. And then if there's some type of gathering, they would go, but then they would, what happens if they are caught, if they catch the virus because someone at that gathering has it, then what? So we had to go through all of these scenarios. And what we really want to make sure is that every single person in Bermuda knows just because you may have the presence of the antibodies does not make you immune. The science right now does not support that. We just don't know. If you have been exposed once, we're not sure if you can be exposed again. So that was really—
So what is the value of testing for the antibodies, if you had to put it in simple terms?
The value for on a country level is to know exactly how many people had it. Because remember, for a long time, we had very restricted testing on island where it was prioritized to if you had symptoms and you were critical, basically. So if you didn't have as many symptoms, but you thought you had it, you weren't tested. But what we're finding now is some of these people are coming up as having the antibody. So actually they did have it. So that would allow us to understand exactly how exposed the island was. But also we're finding as well, the more we do this, that it is seemingly accurate. And the other thing is that we're doing it with the PCR test. So we are not doing just the antibody test, because what if you do have the longer term response? Do you still have it in your system? We don't know yet. And so that's why we're doing them together.
So it's really used to sort of gauge the level of spread throughout the island and how many.
That's the main function. Yeah, exactly. So, but obviously individuals, like I've been tested, obviously, and I was like, it would be really cool to have the antibodies to say I survived, but I don't. So there we go. So it is obviously interesting for people to know, and we're aware of that we cannot ask people to let us test them for the national numbers and not tell them, because they want to know. And so that was where we need to really iron out. And so that is being finalized now. So that's why those who have been told their results, we got a blurb, a approved blurb that goes in the email from the Ministry of Health so that it can be communicated correctly. And we are making sure that we take all of those precautions not to cause emotional harm.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dr. Weldon. I think we've taken a heap of questions in relation to your testing and the work that you're doing. But as we wrap up, we're getting up for the 2-hour mark. I'll do maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I want to shift a little bit into your personal life and your personal experience, because we've talked a little bit about how you came back to Bermuda to contribute and how that worked out and some of the work you've been doing, the many hats you've been wearing. But we're also mindful that, hey, you still have a life to live. You've been doing night shifts. You've been in 3 different countries in this year alone, and you've gone from hotel to hotel, and you did your 2 weeks quarantine, and then you had a night shift with the lab up at Southside. So you're all over the place, but you do still have a life to live. So, I mean, can you speak a little bit about how your health and well-being has been? I mean, Tanae Alexandria says specifically, what is the likelihood of transmission to yourself, and how does that affect your ability to work? And then with you giving back, how are you dealing in regards to your own health and well-being?
So being a frontline worker, like every other frontline worker in Bermuda who is, doing an awesome job, we assess the risk that by being on the front line, we could contract the virus. There are precautions for that. So we have to wear the appropriate PPE. When I'm in the hood room, which is where we actually have the samples that could be active, fully gowned, fully donned, so that I should not be able to contract the virus. If I was to contract it, like I mentioned earlier, we would still be able to do testing, and it would almost go back to when I was in quarantine, when I was helping just remotely. So I'm not afraid that if I was for whatever reason to contract it, that all testing would stop, because that's been something that I want to make sure doesn't happen, and have been able to do. Like I said, the swabbing site will continue. I can still advise remotely, and the testing lab would still function. But as far as my health and well-being, it was a challenge initially, because I went from doing absolutely nothing on holiday in Nigeria, and then got back to England actually, because I flew through Heathrow, which obviously loads of people have flown through. I actually did a 2-week isolation in the UK. And so I was working from home already. And that's when I was actually teaching. The first week was when I was teaching young people in Bermuda or doing experiments. And that was my way of like not being by myself, right? I was going
to ask, how did you cope with that 4 weeks at least of isolation?
Exactly. And I was right. And that for me, I found it was keeping me sane. I know I don't normally teach primary schools, but I really enjoyed that. And again, that was awesome. I miss them. Shout out to everyone that I taught. They were amazing, and just their spunk and their excitement was really awesome. That was the first week. Towards the end of that week is when I got pulled in to help with expanding testing initially to just get more resources. That following week was when I was really more heavily involved, and it was told, okay, you're coming back. Then I came back to 2 more weeks of quarantine. Nicer because it was sunny. Obviously, it was in England. So that was nice. At South P, had the balcony. But again, I decided I was going to teach, because it really kept me sane. That second week, I was able to teach again. And it really helped. I have left, and I haven't taught them for a while now. I do miss them. It did keep me grounded, to be very honest. Obviously, I have more interaction with people now, so it's not as bad. But I do realize I need time to just have downtime. And that's why today, in fact, is one of those days. I had tried to do that last week on my birthday, but I had an interview with my calls. And then I got, we were trying to get the emailed out results for the first time done as soon as possible. So I ended up doing that. But yeah, today I said, look, there's no test to be done. Let me take the day off.
So you say you're in good health then, mentally?
Yeah, I think mentally I'm good. I have a very strong support system. And I think I was actually overwhelmed by the public response to that press conference, mainly because it was misunderstood, the question that the reporter was asking. He wasn't asking himself to challenge my qualifications. It had already been asked, similar to what you've been asking me today, just asking, okay, what do you have to say into response? But a lot of people thought he was questioning, and I wanted to make that clear, and I think I did that last week, but I'll do it again. Myself and Owen have a really good relationship. He's covered all my Bermuda Principles Foundation stuff. So he knows very much about me, and we have no issue. But to see the response from the public and how they came to my defense, I was like, what? I'd never imagined that. And that was overwhelming and encouraging.
I think it wasn't so much about the reporter, Doc, but I think it's important to sort of at least consider that maybe that question would not have been asked. Maybe not necessarily from that reporter, but the topic itself may not have been asked in general had you been somebody else, for example, or had different demographics. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think just the mere fact that was an issue from the beginning, I think it speaks to something in our community, or at least something unspoken, perhaps, in relation to sort of the value that's been placed on you as a young Black woman and a Bermudian who has gone away and done the qualifications and done the requirements needed to have a particular skill and level of expertise to then come home and be questioned by that, when perhaps it would not have been questioned elsewhere or by a person who didn't fit your current identity characteristics.
Yeah, so, I agree. I acknowledge that. And that's not just a challenge for Bermuda. It is a challenge for Bermuda, but it's something I have also had to do within the UK. So I'm kind of used to it in a sense.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make that clear, because there was a real conversation against that reporter. And my father even called into a radio station to clarify, just because we didn't want people, I didn't know he was going to do that. He told me afterwards, but he didn't like the fact that people were kind of coming for Owen. But just wanted to make sure that people understand that, yeah, Bermuda, we do have this issue. And I know for a fact, my last name is English. Dr. Weldon is not a Bermudian name per se. You can't tell my race from that. But had I been a different demographic, as you said, I wouldn't have been questioned. And that is something we need to acknowledge. But in the time being, while we figure out all of that, I'm just happy to do my job.
Well, that's the best response you can give, right? Is to just do the work. But I think that's where other people like myself and Eron and other people in the community have to step in. Because even though, for example, a question like that was asked, I mean, we have to also have some personal sort of responsibility as individuals in the community and understand sort of the appropriateness in the sense that, you know, we have a premier, we have a government. He wouldn't have just picked somebody up off the street and assigned them to run a testing center, contrary to what some people may believe.
Right.
And I think in some respects, you shouldn't have to answer a question like that, in my personal opinion. So I understand your view. In my opinion, it shouldn't be a question to begin with, because when we give validity to that sort of conversation, it leaves room for, you know, what if you hadn't answered that question as well as you did? That would not negate what you're bringing to the table. So people are entitled to their personal opinions on that. And I understand, you know, you've taken a very humble and noble view on it. But I think it's important that at least the record is made clear. And I think that's what you've done today, certainly if you haven't done it before. You mentioned a little bit about teaching and what keeps you grounded. And I think that's sort of a nice segue into the last question. You've been running the Bermuda Principals Foundation. Can you talk with us? Nicholas Butterfield asked, can you talk a little bit about that? What is your work with the Principals Foundation? You also run a scholarship. You've been teaching students throughout all this. How has that been impacted? What do you do? And what do folks need to understand about the work that you were doing prior to this pandemic?
So I will first of all apologize to all those who have applied, because we have extended the deadline, but it has not been extended on the Bermuda Scholarships website. That will be done as of today. And so what I'm going to do is actually extend the deadline for the scholarship until the end of May. So please spread the word. We'll have an updated graphic on our website and on our Facebook for that. My initial, when I finished my schooling, my initial thought to give back is not a new one. This is not because of COVID-19. This was always my stance. And I just felt that after being given the opportunity from the scholarships and to become Dr. Weldon, and because I didn't have to come back and give back, I just felt I should do. It wasn't like a need. It wasn't in the contract that when you finish, come back to Bermuda. But I felt personally compelled to do so. And so in 2016, which was in May 2016, actually 4 years this month. Yeah. Wow.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So 4 years ago, and actually you had Miss Myra Virgil on at the Bermuda Community Foundation. We started at the Bermuda Community Foundation because I'm a scientist. I don't have a clue really about accounting and all the stuff that goes into, you know, running a charity at the time. So I was advised to go there, and they were very helpful in getting me started. I was there for 3 years. And I started this charity to promote science more in Bermuda, because what I saw from growing up here, I didn't even know that what I do now exists. I didn't know. I thought if I like science, I should go and be a medical doctor. Medical doctors are very much needed, and we you know, I appreciate all of them, and I'm happy to be working with them now. But there's a whole other plethora of careers in science that I just didn't know existed. I stumbled into it because, like I said before, I didn't get into medical school the first time. And so I wanted to make sure that our young people knew about this, that they were exposed to these careers. And so from that year, I think from November 2016, we did our first program, which was bringing students down from the UK who I used to teach. I used to be a lecturer teaching biomedical and medical science. I would bring them down, and we would go into the schools and do workshops for middle and high school students on what biomedical science was all about. And so that has been going on. And I also do a conference usually every year. And it's really fulfilling because through that, I have had 2 mentees do small scale PCR-based projects. So for them now to see, that's how the COVID-19
applied in action.
They're like, wow, like Cameron Young, she was the first one. She did a project, we're looking at a taste receptor and how it kind of links to diabetes. She was collecting cheek swabs and extracting the DNA and doing PCR. That's the exact same thing we're doing now for the testing. And she was doing that as a BHS high school student.
So, Doc, do you think that in light of all that's happened with you sort of being on the front pages and being in the highlights in the midst of this pandemic and the use of science, and you're what we think right now to be the first science advisor to the premier and to the government, has the profile of science been raised in Bermuda? What do you think, or what are you hoping will happen after this pandemic when it comes to science and young Bermudians and the way that we value STEM in Bermuda?
100% through the roof, because at this point, and this is why I keep going, and even though there's been challenges, I keep pushing, because this is a life and death situation now.
Mm-hmm.
The whole country got put in a corner. So go in the corner right now and stay there and let science get us out. So I think that the whole pandemic has been a very overwhelming, situation for me, like I said, because I've lost family members, I've lost close friends through this in Bermuda. But then at the same time, I'm not just in a position to be at loss. I'm also able to help and be able to directly impact what happens going forward. I'm not sure what's going to happen after the pandemic, but I think that it's very clear that science needs to be more prevalent in Bermuda. That's clear. I don't know how we do that. I have my own wishes, but the fact that I had to come back and start a molecular diagnostic lab, a government one, because we didn't have one, speaks volumes in and of itself. But now that we have one, that's going to open a lot of opportunity for those who are in science. So we have a professional and qualified medical technologist in the lab who's the lab supervisor, but we also have students doing biomedical science who are lab assistants in the lab right now. And we're not only getting them to help with the testing and they do more the admin side and they do a bit here and there, but they are asking me questions. Why are we doing that? How does this work? What gene are we targeting? What protein does that? And so they're actually learning. We had a chat last night. They were asking me, well, Dr. Weldon, how did you go about getting your PhD? Because they're now thinking about it, right? Our medical technologists, they got accepted into a PhD program as well. So I'm excited because we are not going to ever be in this position again. Yes, I am the one that is for the moment, and I am, as far as I understand, the first science advisor. And someone like me in Bermuda is very rare, but I don't want it to always be like that. It should never be like that again. We should be at a point where we have options. We have an army of people who can step up to the plate.
Well, that's where the representation comes in, right? And I'm sure that that's a gap that you're filling, because when we traditionally look at doctors and scientists, they may not particularly look like you. And so I think you have to recognize the important role that you play, not only with the qualifications and experience and expertise that you're bringing to the table, but just by having your presence in the room and sort of reaching children who may not have otherwise been reached and setting an example for the rest of us. So Doc, we're grateful and we're very thankful and honored to have you on this show today, as well as here in our country, in this island of Bermuda, helping us out with the current COVID-19 pandemic. So on that note, we've reached 2 hours now. This is one of our longest shows ever, but we did have a long series of guests today. So we're going to close the community forum out now. If you don't mind staying on with me for the closing, then we'll do that. So, Dr. Weldon, it's been a pleasure to have you. We've had a host of different guests today, but certainly it was a very positive note to end on with you coming and sharing your expertise with us. We had Dr. Myra Virgil from the Bermuda Community Foundation. We had Miss Allison Towlson of the Bank of Bermuda Foundation. We had some nurses come on from Bermuda College, and particularly in the nursing education field. And it was a pleasure to hear from them regarding some of the opportunities out there for young Bermudians or any Bermudian really who wants to get interested in nursing. And so for those who missed that segment, I encourage you to go and rewind and look at the information there on how to get involved. And last but not least, we had you, Dr. Weldon. I think we covered a lot today. It was a very wholesome interview. We talked about your experience as a young Bermudian coming back to assist. We talked about some of the challenges you faced. And then we also talked about the antibody testing. So Miss Patty Woolridge, I encourage you to go back and rewind and listen to that piece where you can hear sort of what Dr. Weldon has been doing as far as at the testing site down at Southside. And finally, we got to talk to you as a real person, Dr. Weldon. I know that sometimes we may put people on a pedestal and sort of, look at them like some perfect figure, but I'm glad that Miss Tanae Alexandria asked, how were you doing? Because it's important that you take care of yourself while you manage and wear your 3 different hats. So do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I have a lot of shout outs I want to make that I think I mentioned at the beginning.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so the swabbing team, who I have to say have done phenomenal. They come sometimes from 8 in the morning because we have to be there to prepare, and they leave at 7. And they're volunteering their time. These are our young people as well. And they are happy to do that. They are happy to give back to their country. So I'm going to list off their names if you don't mind. So we have Nia Daly, Sakara Phillips, Nafisa Robinson, Deja Simons, Toya Anderson, Deja Keynes, Sandaje Riley, Tala Sumner, Taj Cox, Kaya Wilkes, Kristen Steed, Jade Robinson, Elizabeth Davis, and we have Dr. Keandra Simons, who is on the back end now, but she's doing an awesome job. And we also have great staff who help us out every day. So Dr. Amne Ossaran, as I mentioned, Mr. Stephen Tucker, we have Dalvina Keynes, we have Dean Paris, who runs, as you may know, the warehouse. So they've been working awesome to make sure we have all our PPE. And we have Mr. Nathan Darrell and Mr. Booth as well. So I just want to shout them out and thank the whole team for what they do. And also wanted to say to the people of Bermuda, let's keep safe. Do your physical distancing. Let's keep to the rules, because I do not want us to go back into the corner. Let's keep going so that we can progress through this pandemic and be the leader really in the world, and say that we fought this off and we've been able to get our economy back on track.
Thanks, Doc. I'm smiling because a lot of those names you mentioned, those are people that I recognize that I went to school with. I'm 23, you just 30. A lot of those names are people that I went to school with and graduated with from high school. And so it was heartwarming to hear you. These are people on the front lines, young Bermudians, educated, degrees, qualified people coming back to assist this island, this country in the midst of a global crisis. So if there's anything to our listening public, if there's anything you take from this interview, aside from the antibody testing and the specifics and the different programs out there, never again should we be in a position where we are questioning the expertise and the credentials of our young Bermudians. I think for the most part, the response has been supportive. And those people who questioned you have been rightly criticized. Of course, we have our checks and balances, but never again, Bermuda, should we be in a position where our young Bermudians are eager to come back home and contribute their expertise, more qualified than most, because I can't think of many people who can do what you do, Doc. There may be 1 or 2 out there, but ultimately, never again should we be in a position like that. So let's continue to uplift our young people, our young Bermudians, and all of the people out there who are contributing in the midst of this current pandemic, and those who have contributed long before it, because there have been people out there who may have felt unappreciated beforehand. And so we appreciate you, we value your work, and we're grateful that you took the time out today to talk with us. So we had a few comments that I'd just like to recognize as we close out. Glenda Carlington says, thank you all for your contribution to this program. Excellent information. Bless you, Dr. Weldon, Eron, and Ryan. And so I'll pass that on to Eron, Ms. Carlington, who had to leave a bit early because this is one of our longest series. We're on 2 hours and 15 minutes. We went a bit over time, so he had to go. But thanks, Doc, for staying around to close out with me. And then Maria Madeira says, thank you, Ryan and Eron. So thank you, Maria, and thank you. We wouldn't be able to have a community forum without the community. So we're grateful to our guests, our community, and of course to Burnus for providing us with this platform. So thanks again to everyone. Shaz Wolf, you asked earlier if we could have the premiere on, and just as a follow-up for our next series on Thursday, we will be having the premiere on live. So for those of you who are still with us this afternoon, stay tuned for Thursday. We will have Premier David Brett, the Honorable David Brett, JPMP, Premier of Bermuda, on this series with Eron and I on Thursday. So stay tuned. We've had some really great guests. This has been another great session. Thank you very much. So thanks to our essential workers. Again, we'd like to send our condolences to the families of the 9 persons who've been affected by COVID-19 who've passed away. We send our sympathies to those who are still battling with it, and those out there in the community who are dealing with the knockoff effects of this current crisis. So thanks again. Thanks for engaging with us. Thank you, Dr. Weldon. And to the community and the listening public, we'll see you again on Thursday.